takes a few minutes. Takes a minute. Not yet, almost. Hold on. Takes a minute or two.
So this is Ken Schatz.
Hi, Ken.
Can you hear me?
We can
Great.
hear you now.
Okay, we're live, people.
And we can see you too.
Great. Are you ready for me, Senator Sears?
I'm ready for you, Ken Schatz.
Okay,
Come on
well,
down.
thank you. So I also have a gallery view. I feel like I've made it to Hollywood Squares. This is excellent. So I am Ken Schatz, Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families. I know Christine Johnson has been trying to log in. She's off-site, but she may be able to join us as needed. But obviously, COVID-19 has really taken over all of our attention, as you can imagine right now. So I think, and I've talked a little bit to Senator Sears, I think initially when this was scheduled, you wanted me to give you an update on the plans working towards the closure of Woodside as proposed in the department's fiscal year 21 budget. Frankly, events have overtaken us. We literally have closed Woodside on a temporary basis as of yesterday because of the need to use the facility for an alternative psychiatric facility to support patients with COVID-19 symptoms. That came about as a result of the inpatient hospitals having lots of conversations and concerns about how to prepare for the crisis and the reality that they needed a separate place for people with symptoms so as not to spread the virus. So working with the Department of Mental Health, that change literally happened yesterday. We have moved the 4 youth who were in the Woodside facility to a space in St. Albans. It's across the street from the NCSS facilities. It's not near the correctional facility. I think that was a question that's come up from a couple of people, so I want to let you know that. We are basically setting this up as an interim state-run staff secure program in St. Albans. As we move forward, we're obviously doing the work we need to do to make sure kids are safe, that we have an appropriate program for them. We envision, in light of, again, the needs related to COVID-19, that we want this program to be open to kids who come into custody as delinquents or CHINs, because, again, the needs of our residential system of care are also very important and very challenging during this crisis. And so the way we're doing this is that we have moved our Woodside staff to this program in St. Albans. We are applying we already have policies and procedures regarding intake and screening, mental health crisis, emergency safety interventions. So we're applying all of those in our this new facility that we're running. We'll be obviously adjusting as time goes on, but we just needed to move quickly to respond to this crisis, and so wanted to let you know about that. So let me stop there, and glad to answer any questions that you have.
I get Ken, thank you for that information. I guess the first question, in the overall system, this is a staff secure facility, but not a locked facility the way Woodside was. And is that my understanding?
That is correct.
So
our view is, looking at the population we need to serve, we are comfortable that we can meet the needs for safety of the community and of the youth with a very closely staff supervised program at the present time.
Okay, and this is a 6-bed facility?
Yes.
And do you have enough room for all the staff from Woodside?
We're working on it. Let me be straightforward. We're moving quickly here. So we appreciate the flexibility of staff. We obviously need to make sure we meet their needs. And again, some of this, this was not the kind of thoughtful, planned process that we all want to undertake. But reality is, I really appreciate all our staff. I want to appreciate NCSS in terms of making the facility available, and all the variety of people who are stepping up to enable us to respond, frankly, very quickly in order to address the needs that exist in our community.
Is this the first time this has become public?
You know, we've talked to people, so broadly speaking, I think that's fair to say, but Department of Mental Health and DCF participated in a conference call 2 days ago and yesterday with advocates to discuss this, so people did know about it in advance. It wasn't secret. Information had been shared for a few days.
Thank you. And as far as the other residential programs, how are they being dealt with if they run into a COVID-19 problem or have to isolate kids or whatever?
I do appreciate that question. We're working very closely with them, and it's a variety of approaches and issues depending on the particular needs of the program. So on the one hand, we're asking programs, do you have the capacity to isolate someone with symptoms? If they do, that's great. We're helping to support them have that capacity. Some facilities are running into issues with respect to staff, that staff either have family members themselves with symptoms or they have symptoms. And so that's a challenge that we're also very well aware of and trying to support them. We're trying to consolidate as appropriate. We basically, with respect to our whole system, recognizing the guidance from the health department, trying to minimize contact and spread of the disease when it's appropriate and safe for kids to return home or to move from a residential program to a foster care program. We're trying to do that. We are also working on setting up alternative sites, recognizing that there may be circumstances where programs or foster parents can't manage youth with symptoms in place. We are trying to set up alternative sites so that we can house and care for youth in safe environments. That's a work in progress, but we're working very closely with the state emergency center to operations center to set those up.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Phil.
Thank you, Ken. I have received over the last 24 hours a couple of communications from workers at the new facility, and I will just give you a couple of phrases and allow you to respond to them. Unsafe situation at new facility and hostile work environment. I know this came together very quickly and was not, as you said, following the normal planning process. Are you in contact with these workers about their complaints?
So I have not heard directly. I'm glad to immediately after my testimony talk with the Family Service Division leadership to make sure that we do talk with staff, find out what their perceptions are, and do our best to address them. But no, I have not actually heard that directly.
Okay, and I'm happy to follow up with you as soon as you know something, whether it's through the committee or offline. But I am concerned about that.
Of course, so am I.
We're going to provide some time on Friday for Woodside to hear from the state employees. Hopefully, I've heard from them and their concerns, and hopefully we can have their problems, their concerns addressed. This obviously, as Ken said, is not an ideal situation, and I'm sure there are going to be problems. Jeanette?
We are also going to, just in general, not particularly around Woodside or this issue, but we're going to have some information from both HR and from BSEA about the whole situation with state employees in GovOps.
Ken, I do have one other question, and that has to do with the particular, in the language in the bill we passed yesterday in the Senate, there was language regarding isolation, and that it wouldn't count as isolation if a kid was placed in quarantine. but how would you quarantine somebody, and whether it's the new Woodside 6-bed facility or 204 Depot that I'm most familiar with? These are small residential facilities, and I'm not sure. Have you thought that through, or do you have?
So yes, that's what I was referring to earlier. It does depend on the program. Some programs have separate capacity to maintain, the separation of individuals. We want to follow the health department guidelines. We want to follow the appropriate advice from medical practitioners about how to care for youth who are exhibiting symptoms, both to care for them and others. So in some circumstances, facilities have very separate capacity and rooms where youth could be separated out. So that's may happen on site in certain programs, but in other circumstances, again, we recognize they don't have that capacity, and that's why we're looking literally at creating other facilities to make sure we can care for youth in a safe surrounding. The point of that legislation was to recognize that when we do something to respond to the medical needs of individuals, that's not the same as seclusion, which is utilized when there are behavior issues or challenges with respect to harm to the youth or others. So we wanted to make that distinction. But we're definitely working hard to make sure that we're as prepared as we can be with respect to COVID-19 to both care for individuals, but also prevent the spread of the virus.
Thank you, Ken. And I know many of us are feeling overwhelmed, and I'm sure you trying to take care of all the different divisions within your department and dealing with all these things are as well. And it's amazing the work the administration has done, much of it behind the scenes, much of it on an emergency basis. So thank you for that. Is there any other questions for Ken from committee members? If not, we'll let you get back to your other stuff.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate the support and glad to keep in touch, and I will definitely look into the concerns of staff. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Ken. Michelle, the next item we have on the agenda and on your committee page is a memorandum from Jeffrey Wallen, Director of the Marijuana Dispensary Operations, or regarding the marijuana dispensary operations. And you and I believe Chris Herrick worked to get this memo out. And so we thought it would be a good idea for everybody to understand what's in this memo.
Sure. So, so you should have available on the committee website, you'll have a memo from Jeff Wallen. You'll also have a link to the governor's most recent executive order around essential businesses. And you'll also have a link to a story that was in the New York Times the other day about how state governments are treating medical cannabis dispensaries and whether or not they're considered essential businesses for staying open. The issue came up last week. I was getting word from some legislators, constituents were asking them, well, my medical registry card expires in 10 days and I can't get it renewed through DPS because of, only essential government services right now, but I still need to be able to go get my medicine at dispensaries. And so the dispensaries were wondering if they could take, under these circumstances, whether dispensaries could take an expired card. They also remember that under the current law, all employees have to have cards as well in order to work at one of the dispensaries. And so DPS issued some guidance last Friday that said that for current patients, caregivers, and dispensary staff, those cards have been temporarily extended for 90 days. And so if anybody has a card that was going to expire in that time, it's okay. For now, nobody will be in trouble, and dispensaries can service patients who would otherwise have their card expiring. They also are allowing dispensaries to deliver cannabis products to patients and caregivers in parked cars. So right now, remember what's allowed is delivery, and then people can go to the dispensary upon making an appointment. And now they're able to, like, so a patient could just stay in their car and the dispensary worker could walk out to them. The vehicle has to be within view of the dispensary or a security camera. And everybody has to show their cards and go through that stuff. So that's the guidance they issued on Friday. I put up the link to the executive order because now there's the new kind of rule, which is only essential businesses can be functioning. And the question is are dispensaries considered essential businesses under the executive order? They're not mentioned specifically. I think there's a couple places in the executive order where it seems as though they would be included as essential businesses. When you have time and you can look at the executive order on number 6, it talks about services or functions deemed critical to public health and safety. And it talks about healthcare providers and other healthcare service providers. So maybe they would fit under that exception. And then
If I
there's-
could just
Sorry.
interrupt, Joe, your joint rules committee is meeting with Lindsay Curley, who's supposed to answer these questions about what's essential. And certainly that would be one of the questions for her today, if you could ask that.
This is specifically for this area of medical workers, the dispensaries?
Yeah.
Okay, because
I think the
my understanding right now is consistent with Michelle's opinion that these folks are actually part of that exempted group.
That's what I thought, but
Right, they would
If we-
seem that, and there's also another under number 6 under F, where it talks about pharmacies and things like that. So it seems as though they would, but it might be good to get some clarity on that, and that way you don't have individual dispensaries having to contact the state wondering if they are included, that kind of stuff. So
Jeanette is anxious to speak.
No, I'm just trying to move around. I have to figure out a better way of,
Oh.
I'm
okay.
holding this because I haven't figured out a way of propping it up yet. So
Oh,
I just had to move a little. Thank you,
Okay.
sorry.
Thought you were anxious. Go
No,
ahead, Michelle. Sorry.
that's all I've got, unless anybody has any questions.
Oh, this is really helpful. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people have actually, I mean, I get as many emails about this as I do about any other one subject, and I don't know. I've gotten a lot. I don't know why. I've gotten a lot of emails about toilet paper too, and blocking the border and all those other things that people are worried about.
Great, okay. All right, that's all I've got on that one.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
The
Dick,
next item.
Dick, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Dick, it's Alice. I'm finally in here.
Oh, good.
Yay.
Wow.
Been here and listening, but couldn't get involved. Thanks. Okay.
Good. Did you have a question or comment? Glad to have you with us. I don't know if you
I
can
can't
see.
see, I can't
I
see
don't know if-
those memos.
Oh, okay. Well, if you can see this headline that I'm holding up from the Boston Globe, it's
I
about
can't see that
domestic.
either.
Okay, well, it's about domestic violence. And the
I
title
see,
is When
okay.
Home Isn't the Safest Place to Be. And I think in this crisis, I know we're all concerned about various sectors of society, but particularly the victims of domestic violence.
Right.
We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect those victims at a time when we're supposed to be socially distancing and staying at home. And sometimes, as that article suggests, that's not the best place. And so in a conversation with a couple of people, including Ellen Wheeler-Wurst, who's on board here, is muted right now. We could unmute Ellen, and David Diamora from the Justice Center. And we also have Sarah Robinson and John Campbell due a little later. But we wanted to have a discussion about if there's anything that the Judiciary Committee could do or recommend that would make clear to victims particularly that they're not forgotten in this whole process. And I know it's been discussed on the national level, and maybe I could ask Ellen to to start out with David for a few minutes and then hear from Sarah, if that would be okay.
Good.
And David, if you want to chime in too.
Certainly.
Well,
Good morning.
yeah,
Or good
hi,
afternoon.
everybody. I'm actually going to punt it straight to David, as someone who, especially Sarah, with that same expertise and localized to Vermont as well. But it's nice.
Good to see you. David?
Good afternoon. Hope everybody's doing well. Is my connection working well? Can you hear me, Senator?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I had to reboot. I had to reboot just before getting into the call here. So I guess a couple of things that I'll just mention leading into this. We're seeing nationally, and this is no surprise, an uptick in domestic violence calls and 911 calls. We're seeing an uptick in the severity of the behavior. What we know already, of course, is that many of the men who are involved, and I'm going to specifically talk about men committing domestic violence in this case, what we know is that many of them have, pretty low tolerances for stress, pretty low tolerances for anxiety, pretty high control needs. And when you look at what's happening just generally right now with COVID-19, it's just further pushing all of those triggers and all of those buttons that they already have. Then you build into that the fact that we are staying at home essentially, and people are in many ways trapped in their homes. And when I say trapped in their homes, I mean the degree of control that the guys are then exhibiting over significant others in their family, the demands that they make, the short-temperedness that occurs. Even for those of us who are in healthy relationships, this has been a trying time when we start looking at the stressors and the behaviors of those individuals. It's not a surprise that we're seeing this across the country. We're seeing problems in terms of shortages for shelter beds for people who've been victimized. We're seeing shortages for different reasons. We're seeing shortages in some places because of the volume itself increasing so dramatically. We're seeing shortages also because of the need to essentially not work at full and to be able to create distancing within the shelters so that people are not put into dangerous health situations by virtue of this. We're seeing an increase in some jurisdictions of people utilizing single room hotels for folks who need shelter. We're seeing an increase in an attempt to find family members who might be safe for folks to go to. And so just this is a national problem that is happening right now. In Vermont, I'll let, of course, Sarah talk specifically about Vermont. The one thing I think I want to say about it, though, is that when you ask Senator, what can Vermont do to support folks who are being victimized or at risk of being victimized, is that there's a couple of things. The short-term issue is you really need to look at what your current rules are in terms of how programs are funded, how housing options are funded, and where there are limitations, unintended limitations that have been put in place by the rules you have. You need to look at how you might need to change some of your funding rules to meet the current need rather than figure out how to keep those rules in place and hope that it will work out. There are some problems about that in terms of how you fund things and how you fund places for people to be at. Frankly, the shelter model in general is probably not the most effective one to begin with. And the more that you can look to provide supports and services for people to be able to have sheltering in places like, for example, hotels and other spots such as that, the better off you would be. That's short term. There are longer term housing issues that I won't get into now. And then there's still the issue of programming. What's happening right now is that, now on the one hand, we know that the immediate need is not programming. The immediate need is protection and shelter for people who are at risk. But unfortunately, even adding to this is that all of the necessary social distancing that's going on is pretty much keeping people from getting the programming that they need on top of everything else. So we have people not getting the programming who are already more frustrated, having their triggers pushed, bigger problems. Second issue is that those programs are now a greater risk than ever. As you recall from when I was up there a few months ago and we were chatting, that the funding model for programming right now is problematic. It's a fee-for-service model. Programs are barely making it. Those programs are at greater risk than ever now. And even when the social distancing piece stops, you're still going to have a significant problem if the state doesn't look at changing their funding mechanism, because what will happen, unfortunately, despite the stock market bump yesterday, what's going to happen is that we're clearly in for a long-term recovery, which means that many of those people who most desperately need those services are likely to be among those who have less income than ever and less ability to really work in that fee-for-service model, which means that you're going to lose more programs. So I think those are some very serious things. When I think about it nationally, I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but I think it's an epidemic that's bigger than ever when we talk about the issue of domestic violence. And I think that the particular situation that we're dealing with a real epidemic has made it immeasurably worse. And just by tracking the news stories and by tracking the increase in 911 calls alone, the dramatic increase in violence against women and children is overwhelming. And so I would argue strongly that it's probably one of the top things that you need to look at in terms of providing safety for women and children in Vermont. With that, I'll be quiet and turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, Sarah, and then we can get questions from the committee of either David, Ellen, or Sarah, if it's okay.
Sure. Thank you so much, and thank you for lifting up this issue, and thank you for David for that excellent context. I agree with everything that David said, and I just thought that I would provide a little bit of an update in terms of what the state of things are in Vermont in terms of domestic violence response, especially in the past 2 weeks, and where survivors are experiencing some interruption in the services and systems they rely on, and the organizations that serve them are also where they're getting stretched. So as David noted, I think there's no doubt that in these sorts of times we can expect rates of violence to increase because of the stress, because of the economic impacts that this long-term crisis is clearly going to have on survivors and families. And we do have some evidence looking at other disasters, especially natural disasters, and the way that violence has accelerated or spiked after those events. And so looking at hurricanes, there's lots of good data on how many more survivors are seeking services and accessing things like the court system and law enforcement in the months to a year after an event like that. We do have some evidence looking at other you all hear disasters, especially natural disasters, and the way that violence has accelerated or spiked after those events. And so
I can't, it's really garbled.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Sorry. I think it was my fault.
Okay. But we can also look at things like the Deepwater Horizon crisis, which was a long-term crisis, a little bit more similar to what we may be experiencing now, and saw the same sort of thing in the Gulf states after that month-long crisis. There was an extended period of survivors reporting increased violence, seeking additional supports and services. And so kind of where we are today and what's changed over the past few weeks. So the 15 member organizations of the Vermont Network continue to provide access to a 24-hour hotlines for survivors to call, as well as shelter and emergency housing. And under the governor's stay-at-home executive order, we've confirmed that the Vermont Network member organizations are considered essential nonprofits as providers of necessities and services to economically disadvantaged populations. So they remain in operations. Many of the advocates are working to do more work remotely, but member organizations are doing great. They're really innovating and finding ways to be creative about how they're providing support. So we're just talking to one of our programs down in the Rutland area, and they're just ensuring that there is one staff person each day going to the shelter, kind of alternating that role. And so programs are trying to come up with ways to support survivors, and also considering and implementing the public health guidance that they have received. We've been watching with interest our sister coalitions in New York and Washington and what's happening there. And in some areas there, the burden of illness of the actual workforce of the domestic and sexual violence programs has precipitated shelters closing. And so that's something that we're working really hard to avoid here in Vermont, and trying to build some redundancies so that if there is one particular area or community that's impacted, another program or some other statewide capacity can step in and be answering hotline calls and be providing services if needed. So we're working daily to set those systems up right now. But there's no doubt that the system that we rely on to provide services and survivors rely on to seek safety is incredibly stretched right now and experiencing some major interruptions. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of those for you all. So I can't say enough about the excellent guidance that we've received from the Department for Children and Families Office of Economic Opportunity around shelter guidance as it relates to the COVID-19 epidemic. And this guidance includes that shelters should be limiting their intakes to prevent the spread of the virus, especially if the facilities require residents to share any common space or bathrooms, things like that. So while our programs are really uniformly working to implement this guidance, it does severely curtail the already limited capacity of our shelters in Vermont. And so programs are relying on hotels and motels to house survivors. TCF has also recommended rehousing highly vulnerable survivors, medically vulnerable survivors who are already in shelter, and preemptively putting those individuals in hotels and motels. So we are doing that. But as you might imagine, having survivors in these settings poses its own set of challenges, and ensuring access to basic needs, everything from food to the kind of support that these survivors need, is certainly a challenge. Forensic exams, sexual assault exams, or exams for child abuse or domestic violence continue to occur. And advocates are largely providing advocacy for those exams remotely, which is a big change. We provided some guidance last week to the forensic nurses throughout Vermont, as well as advocates about how to facilitate either phone or video connection between survivors and advocates when survivors are undergoing those exams. That's something that we're working with hospitals right now on rolling out. Luckily, we had already had a telemedicine program that we built out, creating some capacity within hospitals for video conferencing. And so we've been able to rely on that for some of our larger hospitals. And as you know, Vermont has a child abuse clinic at UVM Medical Center, the Child Safe Clinic. Our understanding is that child abuse exams that are not urgent are being rescheduled. And in lieu of in-person exams, phone consults are being offered to non-offending parents or guardians. And I know that you have heard a lot from the judiciary about the judicial emergency and what that has all meant. I think the most immediate impact for survivors has been in the relief from abuse order proceedings. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about what that's looking like for survivors right now. I would say in some counties, that's been a really significant change. In other counties where they were already establishing some systems for after hours, remote access of relief from abuse orders, that has been less of a change, and they're working on just supporting survivors in navigating the court system around hearings, what requests survivors would like to make around hearings, and also accessing court forums during court hours and how survivors would like to do that. And then finally, just referencing what David mentioned around domestic violence treatment. All of those programs have currently suspended their operations because they have traditionally relied on a group format. And the Vermont Council on Domestic Violence is working with the Department of Corrections to determine how individuals who are currently enrolled can successfully complete their programming. As you might imagine, we had some participants who were maybe 3 or 4 weeks away from completion, and others who were 20+ weeks away from completion of that programming. And in many cases, that the date of that completion is tied to their sentences. So we're working with the Department of Corrections to have some guidance around that and consider how we might be able to have those folks complete the programming. And we're also looking at whether telehealth or other remote access can be utilized in the coming weeks to provide that programming. States across the country are having the same conversation, so we know we're not alone there. And I would say in terms of what is needed most, as David mentioned, there are some places where there are state funding regulations which exceed what is required by the federal government, especially as it relates to Victims of Crime Act funds and a few other funds that are administered by the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. We are working to get clarity from the center about whether some of those requirements can be temporarily relaxed, not in violation of the federal requirements, but anything that is kind of over and above those. But I would really say that what is needed most is support for our member organizations and for survivors. And in the short term, up to a year, we know that our programs, in order to stay viable, frankly, and to continue to support survivors, are going to need financial support. And we don't know exactly what that's going to look like right now, but I would certainly appreciate your continued interest in that moving forward.
We continue to hear dire financial concerns, and but I wanted to add, and I think Michelle or Bryn, you handled the DV issues. Which Michelle, is that you?
Yes, that's me.
Yeah, so if you and Sarah could work together on any proposals, and I'm including money here now because we're going to have to be dealing with these things. We can't just let them go, but also perhaps we could also talk to Jim Baker over at Corrections about how to best do the batterer intervention programs and any other. I don't know what we can do for legislation, but there will be another bill coming. And so we need to prepare for it. I think this is a issue that we don't want to get away from us, that it to me, it's the number one crime problem in Vermont is domestic violence. And we just don't want to see it get any worse than it already is. And so not talking necessarily about legislation, but to make sure that the RFA process is continuing and there aren't it isn't more difficult for people to get relief from abuse in the middle of this crisis.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the relief from abuse orders, after hours, that process is going relatively smoothly because there was already kind of some groundwork laid there for applications for relief during business hours. There's really 2 pathways. Survivors can either still access a court building. The forms are in a lobby. They can then leave the building, fill them out, return and drop them in a drop box. And they're not required to get those forms notarized, which is a good thing. And then the court clerks are calling survivors by phone to have them swear to the affidavits over the phone. We're certainly working with survivors to encourage them to call the court as soon as they've dropped those off and let the court clerk know that they're there to try and kind of accelerate that process. And in terms of the hearings, certainly there's a easy path or a clear path, I will say, for attorneys to request remote hearings for pro se litigants. Many survivors are pro se in the relief from abuse order realm. They can also make that request of a court clerk, but that request can take a few days for a judge to determine how that's going to work. And so it's all very new, and we're just trying to hear from the field about how that's going.
Are there any other questions from the committee for either Ellen, David, or?
Gary Jelly.
All
It
right,
sounds familiar.
We're used to that.
yeah, we're used to that.
Just like being in committee.
Yeah, it is.
Senator Sears,
Although you have a hat on.
That's true.
can I interrupt for 1 second? There's 2 people on the call that I don't know who they are. The first one, your phone call ends in 0032. Can you identify yourself?
It's me, it's John, Peggy.
Oh, John
Oh,
Kemp,
John.
great.
Okay,
And the other one ends in 9025.
That's Pepper.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, guys. I'll rename you
you.
so we know who you are.
are there any questions for David, Ellen, or Sarah from the committee? John, or Pepper, were you able to hear the comments from David and Sarah? Do you have
Yes.
any comments on this subject?
Well, I think that David and Sarah, basically set the scene extremely well, and they've identified most of the problems that we face. So I think I'll limit my testimony very short to what we're seeing across the state currently. And it's actually, interestingly, we saw a spike right after the announcement came to close the schools, the school closures. And so there was a spike in DV cases, but that's leveled off. And it's been relatively quiet, thankfully, this past week. But every one of the state's attorneys feel the same way, and that is that this is the calm before the storm. We all recognize, as David and Sarah mentioned, about the stressors that will continue to exacerbate the potential for domestic violence, and that we have to be prepared for that. One of the things that does concern me and also the other SAs is the potential for the resources that are currently in place. What happens if they go down? And an example of that would be Rise in Barry. That was a house, sober housing, but it also dealt with some folks that have been involved with domestic violence, and that had to close due to an exposure case. So there's a concern that, okay, so what happens there? Who are the backups for that, or where are the backups? The other thing is that while we have tried to reduce the detainee population, and we continue to do that, and even though we put on, one of the areas that we feel very strongly that we should not be releasing anybody who is in there under domestic violence cases, some of the other folks that are getting out and going back into stressful situations, we're not sure how that will turn out. So we have to be prepared to keep an eye on that. So I think that the best thing right now is for all of us to be working together to make sure that we do have these resources for folks in place. It's going to be hard when, as usually you'll go to a location, and if, we're trying not to, I think law enforcement is trying not to arrest when there are alternatives or there's ways to try to calm situations down. But no matter what, these are cases that we're not seeing a lot of violence, but in domestic disputes, if you will, you need to separate the folks. They need to have different places to go, and that is going to be proving to be a challenge as well. So I think that the committee is very aware of all of these problems, and you guys will be acting accordingly. One thing, and this is a little bit off the topic, but I hope that you don't mind if I mention that we are seeing, and this actually came from 2 domestic violence cases that came in that were arraigned, but almost every other case is being arraigned as well. The defendants are all basically, or they're claiming that they have COVID-19. In fact, Caledonia court had to be closed and cleaned yesterday because the defendant was very boisterous and spitting and claiming that he had COVID-19, and I believe that they had to sterilize the courtroom afterwards. So we're having a lot of that occur, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with that. That and also some people who supposedly have tested positive. Actually, this came from Bennington, Senator, where Erica had mentioned that there has been one woman who supposedly has been tested positive and she's out in the community. And the question is, what do you do with that in those situations? So that's kind of a wrap up of what we're seeing here. And as the other thing, and actually Sarah had alluded to that, and the courts, the clerks have been very helpful in many of the courts regarding helping people with the RFAs. But we had actually one court, and I just don't think they understood the problem. But a woman, one of the victims, did not want to appear in court. And so she wanted to appear by phone, and the clerk told her that she had to, file a motion. Unfortunately, the woman couldn't read or write, so clearly that wasn't going to happen. So we helped out, intervened in that, one that we normally wouldn't get involved in. But I think that there are going to be other cases coming up where I think it's going to be extremely important for the courts to really come up with a solid rule regarding when people have to appear in court, as far as victims or witnesses to, let's say, some domestic violence case where there is a weight of the evidence hearing. And so if we're asking or demanding that witnesses and others come into court, actually physically in court, and not do it remotely, I think we're basically endangering everybody. So I'm just hoping that the court will move forward to have all of the judges, instead of just being discretionary on their part, and most of them have been very good about it, but we're concerned that a couple of them may actually be requesting people to appear live, and I think that would defeat the purpose of what we're all trying to do.
So thank you, John. And I will just mention that we had heard from Jim Baker also that people being placed in the correctional facilities are claiming they have COVID-19, and that's human behavior, I guess. We saw some of that behavior during the AIDS epidemic, where people would claim to be and suffering from that. And I think the one thing I heard from all three of you is the shelters are not the best option in this type of situation. And how can we help you with that? That's, I guess, the question. Sarah or David is DCF providing that?
Yeah, so I can say that, we have been so impressed with the guidance that we received from DCF, and DCF is in effect said, go ahead and house people in hotels and motels, and we will ensure that your organizations are reimbursed for those dollars. And the guidance we've gotten has been really clear. It's been very timely. And so I feel like there's been great support in that respect. I think the question continues to be, there's of course safety issues for survivors being housed in hotels and motels. It's different kind of location, requires different kind of access to food, to other needed necessities, things that can be a little bit more easily acquired in shelter. And so we're working through those challenges. But I have to say, we've just been very, very pleased with the guidance we've gotten from DCF.
Thank you. So are there other questions for any of the three witnesses? This actually has been very helpful to me to understand what we're up against here. And Ellen and David, thanks for making time from your busy schedules to join us in this unusual way. It's maybe the new world that we live in. But
you're quite welcome.
Yeah, we're pretty used to Zoom, so anytime, we're here anytime.
Yeah,
truly.
and I wanted to also mention to both Ellen and David, Megan, the director of the Justice Center, sent out 7 things you should consider before releasing people from jail. And I did send that out to the members of the Senate. And I think it's extremely helpful that that get broadcast as widely as possible. Those 7 considerations are so important when you're thinking about sending somebody out. So if anybody hasn't seen that, I urge you to go on to CSG. Go ahead, David, tell them how to find it.
Just Google 7 considerations for reentry, and then add CSG to it, and you'll find it. It'll pull right up.
Just call her.
Alice, did you have a question?
No, I'm all set on that, Dick. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
People are doing a good.
Oh, somebody besides Dick
I get it.
Sears has a call.
Yeah, I do. It's a problem here. Okay.
Thanks very much to all of you. We're gonna
Thank you.
switch gears. Is Judge Gerson around? Or thank you, Ellen and David.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody, and Sarah, stay safe, please, all of you.
Same to you, Senator, and all the rest of you. Take care.
Thank you. We're gonna switch now to I was trying to get the confirmations done of our judges, because who knows when we will be back to vote on their confirmations. And despite Eric's great work at researching the issue, I kind of agree with Eric that, I kind of agree with myself, I guess, that we may have a problem if we don't confirm judges before we adjourn. So I wanted to be prepared to do that. We have 1 justice and 2 judges to confirm, and so I wanted to be prepared to do that just in case something happened. I don't want to be at YouTube. Thank you very much. So Peggy sent out the various judges, and is Judge Grierson on, or is Justice Cohen on? Yep.
I don't
think they're on yet, but this is Judge McDonald Katie here.
Well, you know what, Judge, as soon as I find your, God, this is maddening. I had Judge Cohen up, Justice Cohen up. Well, welcome, Judge.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear who's on.
So this is Judge McDonald Katie.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm calling you from Dover here at home.
Oh, great.
And Judge, why don't we start with you since you're on?
Okay.
And Peggy has sent us a copy of your information. And I know you're going to be doing Bennington and Windham counties. And I know you're currently, before you became a judge, you were a state's attorney, deputy state's attorney in both counties, or have I got it all wrong? Maybe you should tell us a little bit about yourself, Judge. Can you, Judge Katie? Judge?
You're frozen right now, but oh, there you are. It says my internet connection is unstable.
Oh.
That's Dover.
We have a committee on that.
Yes. So I'll talk and you tell me when you can't hear me.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So thank you for inviting me. And I'm currently over in Bennington in the family division where I'm assigned. And I am presiding over the domestic docket involving parentage and divorce actions, and the juvenile docket involving juvenile delinquencies, and the CHINS docket, which is the abuse and neglect docket. I've covered the criminal division, as well as civil stalkings and relief from abuse orders while I've been here, and day 1 was December 16th for me, and before that, from my confirmation on October 30th until December 16th was an orientation period. That was about 6 weeks of both classwork, of going to meet with presiding judges, taking classes, an online class through the National Judicial College for 5 weeks, as well as shadowing judges. So that all got us ready for December 16th launch date. And then we're now kind of in the new world of kind of judicial by phone and teleconferencing and remote working from home. So it's really been a very interesting, exciting, and each day changing evolution of the judiciary's response to, access to justice here in Vermont while we're going through this. But it's been very exciting and rewarding and extremely challenging. Before that, I was over at the Wyndham State's Attorney's Office. I was a deputy in charge of the juvenile docket, and I had a criminal division docket involving physical abuse cases relating to a lot of the kids that were on the CHINS docket already. And that was prosecuting usually the provider that abused the child. I was there at the Wyndham State's Attorney's Office for 9 years. Before that, was over at Fisher and Fisher for about 7.5 years doing civil work, real estate, predominantly municipal law, estate planning, probate work, and some civil litigation. Before that at the Bennington State's Attorney's Office, and before that at the Vermont Legislature for about a year right after law school, and worked with Charlie Bristow in the Senate and the House Judiciary Committees. And that was probably about 22 years ago.
I vaguely remember that. And Charlie was amazing. And he had, for those of you who didn't know Charlie, he was the legislative counsel for both committees. And he also had been a judge, had been corrections commissioner, had been public safety commissioner. So when an issue came up, he had either been the judge or the administrator in charge of the department. So a very fascinating guy. And
so Charlie was probably the most influential mentor that I had in my law career. So I was fortunate to make his acquaintance and then to work under him. So I was very lucky, but it's been a long way, an interesting way here. And part of what I've loved in my career is public service aspect of it. And being a judge is really kind of a even more unique opportunity to continue in public service. And I enjoy that. That's the best part of the job.
And you were also a summer law clerk for Patrick Leahy.
That was in between second and third year of law school. I worked down in Washington, D.C. for a summer and was on the committees there. That was really exciting, getting to meet a lot of people down there and experience Washington, D.C. during the summertime. So,
I guess the obvious question is, why did you want to become a judge? You had been a very active state's attorney in Bennington and Wyndham counties, and you've decided you wanted to apply to become a judge, which is a new venture. And
it is.
Yeah.
I think probably being a deputy state's attorney for 9 years, I felt that I really had really understood and had reached a point where I felt very comfortable in my job, knowing exactly what I needed to do, how to do that at a high level of representation. I enjoyed the aspect of being in court, rules of evidence, of working towards really a resolution of a case, or if there wasn't a resolution, of litigating it, and felt that I had really accomplished a lot in that position. And just being in front of judges each day, you get an aspect of what it's like to do that, seeing it from a prosecutor and advocate's position. And it appealed to me of being able to maybe continue that aspect of public service, but in a different component of not just one position as an advocate, but really bringing groups together to try to find just resolutions to cases. And that really appealed to me, of being able to, have maybe a broader impact on families and children than just the position through the state and my advocacy through the state. And so watching judges and getting to practice in front of judges that gave me really an interest in what they do, and thinking that that's something that I thought I would be able to do and bring my expertise in the area of juvenile law to that position. And especially in the need here, as much as it's a confidential docket, and a lot of people not knowing what happens in the courtroom each day in that juvenile docket, it's really pretty critical making good choices and trying to make interventions with children when they're young so that they have good opportunities in the future. Because the ramifications of children who are not getting their needs met, we see that in all different dockets, in the criminal docket, in the civil docket, through when people don't have jobs, can't afford rent, forfeitures, evictions. With regards to criminal docket, if there is needs are not being met and adverse consequences, they are involved in the criminal justice system. You know, we see that impact of what happens with kids and trauma. It impacts all of our other dockets down the road. So it's an important place to really, I think, work diligently in helping kids and helping families to be safe and to be able to remain in the home. So it's a docket that I feel really passionate about. And I just thought that this opportunity to be a judge, maybe I can use that expertise in that area. So, and again, that idea of continuing in public service really appealed to me. So.
Good. And you get to travel the mountains.
And I get to travel Route 9, yes, which hasn't been too bad. So, I mean, I feel really fortunate to be here in Southern Vermont, you know, to be able to be a judge in, you know, kind of your home area. That's really unique. And I am really lucky to be able to have that opportunity, because Bennington was my home, and I really still connected to Bennington with, you know, that's where I had my children. That's where I had my first legal job. It's where it was the first place that I went into a courtroom, where my doctors and dentists are. So it's a community that I still have connections to. So I feel very lucky to be able to be there.
Are there other questions for the judge?
I would just like to say, oh, wait, Alice.
Yep.
I would just like to say, appreciate your diverse background in coming into the position. That's an issue that's come up recently, as judges needing to have more diverse practice prior to becoming a judge, and you certainly fit the bill in that respect. So thanks for applying.
Thank you.
And signing on.
Yes, thank you. And the process that I'm planning to use is that next week, now that we can vote remotely, according to our new rule, next week, usually we wait a week because we want to hear if anybody has a concern about a judge, and then we will vote as a committee to recommend or not recommend it. We rarely would not recommend, but someday next week, whenever we're here remotely. So that'll be the process. Yes, Senator Brew.
Quick question. I'm trying to remember the actual language of the resolution, but my memory was that it said the Rules Committee may authorize vote remotely.
No, I think.
Do we have to make a request?
I thought it was that committees could vote by remotely, but the Senate can't yet.
Okay, I was just wondering, my memory was that there was a step where the Rules Committee had to say it was okay.
Yeah, I know if that needs to happen, I'll definitely ask a member of the Rules Committee who happens to be a member of this committee to ask the Rules Committee.
Do you remember if that's the case?
My memory is consistent with yours, Philip.
Oh, okay.
All right, so I will formally ask the Rules Committee to decide if we can vote remotely on the judges. Thanks, Judge. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is Justice Cohen available yet?
Yes, I'm on the phone. I've been listening. I called in right at 1 o'clock, and I didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, we didn't see you because I guess you don't have Zoom up there in Rutland. Or wherever you are.
I'm not. I wasn't sure if I should do it, so I just called the number that was on the on the email, and so I got on at 1 o'clock, and Judge McDonald Katie was in the middle of her her response, so I didn't want to.
Well, Justice Cohen, I mean, we're very happy to have you, and this is our first attempt at a Zoom meeting, and so excuse us for not knowing all the details and messing up a little bit, but
No, and I think we're all sort of navigating through this.
yeah, I feel as though I know you because I've met you several times down here in Bennington, and when we've had judiciary days, and but I don't know that other members of the committee know much about you, and so maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience and what you've been doing, and now that you're have been named a justice by Governor Scott, how that's going, because you're driving to Montpelier instead of driving to Bennington or Windham County or wherever.
Yes, now I'm northbound versus southbound. So
yeah,
I grew up in Rutland and was educated in Rutland public school system, and then was a lawyer here in Rutland, a statewide practice until 1999, and Governor Dean appointed me as a trial judge in 1999, and then for 20 years I was presiding judges in all three of the courts: family, criminal, and civil. Fairly evenly distributed between the three, and in different locations. A lot in Rutland, but Windsor County, and the last 3 or 4 years I was been in Bennington County. And then when Justice Skoglund retired, I put my application in for her position, and was fortunate to receive the appointment from Governor Scott, and took the job in December. It's been an education, and then working on both the adjudicative part of the job, but also there's a significant management component of the job as well, which is obviously first and foremost in the last 2 weeks on how we managing the courts, trying to keep the court systems operational as best we can, trying to maintain safety for our users of the court as well as our staff members, and making sure that that there's as much consistency with the system as we possibly can under some very unique circumstances where there's no roadmap, there's no playbook for any of this. We're working well together to try to answer the questions that come up hourly, and the same way I'm sure that the legislature is as well. So it's been, that unto itself, it's been a remarkable education. It's been an interesting few months.
I'm sure.
That's an understatement, I think. You got indoctrinated into this, but I'm interested in the management role of a Supreme Court justice, and I don't think many of us realize how much involved that is in trying to make sure that we just had quite a discussion about the domestic violence docket and how that's been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm sure that for all of us, and particularly for the judiciary, it's been a struggle.
There's certain things that need to occur on a regular basis, and obviously the domestic docket, abuse docket, is something that needs to happen on a weekly basis, and especially with all the additional stresses that people are facing now, and it's something that we talk about regularly. So we're continuing with the hearings. We're trying to open them up to do some remote component, but also allowing people to come to court, and then there's a question as to who can come to court with them. Again, these are things that we're making sure that that everyone's interests are best in mind. So there's issues with that we deal with on trying to ensure this for every component of the court system, what's essential, what's not, and it's been incredible to work with the other 4 members as well. Our ability to work together has been really strengthened over the last couple of weeks.
Thank you, Justice. I'm sorry. And
I'm not used to that yet, Senator. I'm still not used to the justice thing. It took me a long time to get used to the judge. And then Judge McCaffrey told me when I got appointed, he said, "Hey, you lose your first name when you get on there." And I said, "Now I got this justice one. That's a little bit more formal."
Are there any other questions for Justice Cohen? Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be talking to you later, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your hard work and commitment to this. And
thank you.
Should I hang up now? Is that what?
Whatever you. If you want to listen to Judge Warren, if she's on, you're welcome to stay on board.
Okay, thank you, Senator. I think I will stay on.
Okay, is Judge
I am
Warren?
here.
Oh, great.
I am here. Yes. Good afternoon.
We cannot see you, but you're here. So.
No, I didn't get on Zoom either. I wasn't sure about the permission through the Judiciary, and I didn't dare try it on my phone and not get connected. So I apologize for that.
Well, that's all right. And
This
is a learning lesson for all of us, quite frankly. And Judge Gerson will be sending out instructions on Zoom shortly to all judges.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you for joining us, Judge Warren.
Thank you.
And you're located way up there in the northern part of the state. Senator Benning probably knows who you are.
We've known each other for many years. Yes, I live in Waterford, Vermont, which is just a few miles from St. Johnsbury. I'm actually positioned in Windsor County Family Court for my first term here, and am really enjoying it.
Good. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself for those of us who don't know you.
Certainly.
How you ever got to become a judge.
Certainly.
I can't wait to hear this.
I was born in Morrisville, but for the 98% of my life, I was raised in St. Johnsbury. Came back from St. Johnsbury, Vermont when I was 6 years old, went to schools here, graduated from St. Johnsbury Academy, went on to Boston College for my undergraduate degree, taught a year and a half at St. Johnsbury Academy, and then got married and moved up to Maine where my husband was living. And we decided to move back to St. Johnsbury. He's also from here. And we raised our family here after we got married. We had 2 daughters. I clerked for the bar exam for 4 years and had 2 young daughters at the time. Went through 1 pregnancy during the clerkship. And then after the clerkship, took the bar exam and a few times and worked for various places, including a small firm in St. Johnsbury doing general civil and family litigation, wills as well, and went out on my own for 5 years and did basically the same thing, a general practice firm where I did some family law, very little criminal, and a lot of family law and civil litigation, and then worked in the court system for just under 2 years. I thought I wanted at one point to get into court administration. And during that time, I became aware of a deputy position at the Caledonia State's Attorney's Office and applied for it and received the position. The primary position was for handling the juvenile docket with a small percentage of the criminal cases. And I really enjoyed the position greatly and did that for just about 4 years. And when my boss at that time retired, I put my name in for state's attorney and was appointed by Governor Douglas and was the state's attorney for Caledonia County for 10 years and handled every type of case from the juvenile docket to the post-conviction relief cases, appeals, murder cases, robberies, sexual assaults, domestic assaults. So handled a very big gambit of types of cases. Very much enjoyed my work. When I heard about judicial positions opening up. I was interested. I've always been a learner. I've always loved to learn. Even though I'm in my 50s, I just love learning. I watch Jeopardy diligently every night because I can't get enough of trivia and learning, and I mean that. And this presented a new challenge, and I felt like I would at least try, and I was very honored to be considered for the position, and even more honored to be appointed. So I've really enjoyed it. I'm sitting on family cases, much like Judge McDonald Katie, hearing juvenile cases, domestic cases, RFAs, and I'm greatly enjoying it. I really enjoy Windsor County as well.
Nice to hear. And how is it being away from your family?
Well, we have two
grown. Are you commuting?
No, I commute. I've stayed only a few nights when the weather was terrible, but I commute every day. It's good downtime. I've gone from a 10-minute commute when I was here in town to about an hour, but I actually am enjoying it. I put in a podcast or a book on CD, and I listen down and back, and I really enjoy the downtime. Our children are grown, so we don't have children at home, and it's just my husband and me, and he's been very supportive throughout my entire career as to whatever I wanted to do and wherever I wanted to do it. And he's been incredibly supportive during this one as well, as have our kids. So it's actually not been bad, the traveling. Yeah.
Good.
Any questions?
So I'm disappointed you didn't start out your trivia contest here by talking about how you first got to know a whole lot of lawyers in St. Johnsbury.
Flipping pizzas at George's Pizza. Yeah, that was a high school job that I had. It was my brother's pizza shop and later my parents' pizza shop in St. Johnsbury. And that was actually how I first met Joe Benning. Other than listening to him as a radio broadcaster on our local radio station. He was a broadcaster in the evening.
We had no idea he was a broadcaster.
He was very good too. But yeah, I flipped pizzas. I made subs, and that was how I earned my summer money and weekend money when I was in high school and later in college. And I met a lot of lawyers there. I met Bob Butterfield there, my prior boss at the state's attorney's office, Joe Benning, and many others there. And so it was a local pizza joint. It's not there anymore, but yeah, I worked there for years, many hours.
She kept asking all of us how it was to be in the law and how she could get into the law, and we all kept trying to dissuade her. Obviously, we failed.
When most of your experience appears to be as state's attorney, but back in from 95 until 2003, you were in private practice.
Yes.
And obviously a lot's changed since 2000. Lots changed since 2003. But have you done any civil cases yet, or will you be doing them soon? Or?
I haven't yet, no. And I don't think I will unless I'm asked by, one of the civil judges to cover their docket on a given day if need be, which is fine because I'm in the Windsor Orange Wyndham district. And so there may be some crossover, especially with the COVID pandemic where we might need to cover for one another. So I haven't as a judicial officer, no, but I did do some way back in my prior practice as a lawyer.
You were a secretary with Ginsburg, Axelrod, and Adler. And is that the same Ginsburg who was so active in the Brigham case? Yes,
that's the one and only. Yes.
Yeah, he was very, such an impressive attorney.
Very, very much so. Very smart, very likable.
I didn't know the other two, but he was frequently in the Judiciary Committee or other committees during the issues and other issues that followed. Any other questions for Judge Warren?
No.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And Judge Grierson,
thank you all.
Thank you for arranging this and joining us by Zoom.
Well, thank you for bringing them in during this time period. I know that they were all individually anxious to take the next step, and I appreciate the committee taking the time in the current environment to do this, and I know they appreciate it, and thank the committee.
Judge Grierson, before you hang up, when the other judges decide they want to hang up, I'd like to have you hang on the line so we can talk with Peggy about something I noticed. I just want to make sure that everybody that may be speaking before us is protected moving forward.
Sure.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to hang up.
Thank you very much.
all.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you both
Stay
very,
healthy.
Yes,
very
thank you
much.
very
Thank
much
you.
for hearing us.
Bye.
Thank
you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Go
So-
ahead.
Peggy, are you still on here?
Yes,
Huh.
I am. Do you want me to go off the
Okay.
record at this point, off the live stream?
Yes, please.
Okay, hold on.